Hi there, and welcome to another devlog for my game Blitloop. It hasn't been that long since my last update, so I think I will just walk you through the major things I've been working on since then. And I'll probably just show stuff in a random order, but, well, who cares? So, let's get started. Okay, let's start here. In my main shader, I now have a hit effect again. And I used to handle things like this using material property blocks. And that used to be the recommended way to modify shader instances in Unity. However, when using URP or HDRP, material property blocks breaks batching. So when having tons of enemies, each being sent in their own batch to the GPU, then there is a quite high chance to get the performance impact. So I have rebuilt that using ordinary material instances that are created, stored with each enemy in the pool. And I did also consolidate all my different shaders I had for enemies into one big main shader that now handles everything. Because with URP, objects using the same shader are batched together, even if they have different materials. So now all my enemies, including those running a shader effect like the hit effect, are rendered together in one single batch of the GPU as they all uses the same shader, even though they have quite different materials. One thing that I ran into was that some of my materials already use emission. And it was hard to add another emission effect on top of that in a way that was generic and reusable. So what I did in my shader is that I have an emission base intensity, which is used as a constant value for the material, and then I have an emission effect intensity that is added on top of the base value, and which is the value that I control from code, which allows me to flash the materials visually. And while we are at the combat subject, I have also done a little bit work on my enemies, but not very much. But I did bring back my up-and-coming popcorn enemies. The popcorn enemies, they are the easy ones that are going to be satisfying for the player to just keep blasting away. Easy to kill, and they don't do much resistance. And to create interesting patterns for these guys, I'm using an interface which allows me to design different patterns with different kinds of scriptable objects. So here is my scriptable object implementing a basic Lishayou curve for editing patterns, where I can control things like the amplitude, the frequency, and the phase. And implementing stuff like this brings me back to the old days when I was coding demos on the Amiga with my old demo group, Equinox. Yeah, adore us. And yes, I'm that old. Now, let's move on to art. And I finally got around to redesign the player's ship. I've been using this stand-in programmer art version and a little bit longer than I was planning to. And I did this quite a long time ago. And I remember when I did this one, it was quite a challenge to have something that should look good from an almost orthographic 2D view. Look like a sleek fighter ship and have space for this large ball-shaped pod that you can pick up. And to make all that come together, well, I sort of gave up at that time. I thought I will deal with this later, and well, now I finally did. And when I was picking up this old file, I found a few sculpts that I had done a long time ago in Blender when I was trying out some initial ideas and concepts really early on. I don't even remember doing these, but I thought they were quite funny, especially the one with the teeth. Anyway, so using the sculpting tools in Blender, I now started to try to find some new ideas. And after a few hours, I had this guy going. A little note here, I struggle quite a bit when I sculpt concepts in Blender because I'm so used to ZBrush. And it's very tempting for me to just quit Blender and do this very, very fast in ZBrush instead. So I have to keep forcing myself to keep using Blender or I will never learn it properly. But on a positive note, it's getting easier every time. So I'm starting to feel that, well, I will probably be there one day. Anyway, this design, I was quite happy with it initially. It looks more like a fighter ship than the previous one that looked more like a turtle or something. And this design also have a logical place where I can put the gun muzzles. However, this concept didn't really work out once I started making a low poly version and brought it into the game. The player's ship is about 1/16 or something of the screen size, and the details became just too small on a mobile screen. And it was so thin when it was viewed from the side, so it sort of almost disappeared. So really, again, it's surprisingly difficult to make a ship design that works good in this almost 2D orthographic side view. And whatever I think looks good when I'm concepting, many times just fails when I bring it into a side view only. And eventually what seemed to work out for me was simplification. I kept removing details, I kept making larger surfaces, because small details simply don't work in this game, how I have set it up. So it sort of came down to the scale here, and just simplify, simplify, simplify. So what I have here now is pretty much the final model. It's around 700 polygons, which I'm very happy with. And it works just fine from the in-game view. On a related note, this is my current workflow when I'm iterating on a game asset in Blender. I like to split my assets into multiple meshes while I'm working. But when I do the export, I want them to export as one single mesh for the game engine. And by using geometry nodes in Blender, I can automate this process very easily. I have an export collection that exports directly to my game project. And within that collection, I have a geometry node setup that joins all the meshes together. This way, I can simply click the export button to refresh the asset in the game engine at any time. And after this side note, let's go back to what else is new regarding art. So one other thing is that I have brought the engine exhaust effect back. And it now properly reacts to the player's velocity. And this is a very simple effect. It's done using Unity's old particle system with just some controlling code. And another new thing is that I have now added some shader logic that indicates when a pod is picked up. Currently, I just flash a few polygons green, but maybe I will add a little bit extra to it later on, like having it rotate or blip a little bit around the cargo bay. I'll think about that. And just like the hit shader, this used to be done with material property blocks that I now know breaks SRP batching. So just like the hit shader, I'm now instancing this material. Next, let's take a look at the UI. I have reworked my workflow for how I create UI symbols, making it a little bit easier for me to base them on my already existing in-game assets. So I could remove my old sort of Bowser-like symbol that I've been using for the pods, and I have now replaced it with an animatable symbol. So I create this symbol and its animation in Blender from the in-game asset, and then I use a crypto matte and Blender's compositing system to render it out as a symbol that I can use in the UI. And I have made a separate video outlining this full workflow. And if you're interested in that, I'm going to put the link in the description to this video. Anyway, I render it out as a flipbook, but since UI Toolkit in Unity doesn't handle flipbooks or custom shaders at this time, I did use Affinity Designer to break it apart and export as individual frames, which I then can put together in a sprite atlas, which works fine too. So to control the animation the same way I would with the flipbook, I have a pod symbol controller mono behavior that all pod symbol visual elements can access for runtime animation. So when the visual element pod symbol changes its state via runtime binding, it uses this mono behavior to handle the visual representation when it changes into this new state. Moving on to gameplay, pickups are now restored in the game, and they can be dropped by enemies when they are eliminated. The logic for probability, pickup weighting, and some custom rules based on the current state of the game world is handled through scriptable objects. And this allows me to share the same logic between multiple enemies, while still be able to have some variations in the drop logic for certain enemy types. And finally, let's end this devlog with some tooling updates. I have now started using my custom build package, the one I created when I ported Hyperstorm to Android about a month ago or so. And this one allows for easy drop-in or custom game-specific build actions that I can use on a per build configuration basis. So one new action I've added is one that lets me easily override which levels that are included in a specific build configuration. And this will be perfect for making a demo version like for Steam, which ensures that I can continue automating builds while always knowing that the correct assets are used for each build. And I have also added a suite of asset validation tests, which helps with some basic Q&A and other sanity checks to avoid those simple mistakes when I set up assets in the game. These tests check that assets are configured properly and that levels and scenes are set up correctly, helping me to catch all those small little errors that can creep in. Most of these tests are quite simple. For example, one part of my validation test parses all enemies and checks that layers and triggers are configured correctly, along with many other checks. And I have a pre-process build script that runs automatically when the game is built and fails the entire build if not all assets pass the validation. So as extra icing on the cake, I run this entire test suite automatically on every new commit to my Git repository. Better safe than sorry, right? And that's all, folks. It's a wrap for this time. So thanks for watching. And if you have any questions or you want to discuss something related to this video or game development in general, feel free to join my Discord server. And take care, see you in the next one, and may the source be with you.